Oh, hello. Great to be here and great to know. I can't see you, but it's great to know that your presence is here. Hello, I'm Chaz Evans. I'm Director of Exhibitions for VGA Gallery and your host for today's episode of VGA Fireside, the first episode of 2022. Before we get started, let me give some credits and thank yous because gratitude is the true path. I want to thank the producer of this show and the director of operations for VGA Gallery, Bryce Pulls. I want to thank the designer of our designs in this show and the director of communications for VGA, Eleanor Schichtel. I want to thank the VGA staff and the VGA board. And I want to thank the Independent Game Designers Association Chicago chapter. Thanks very much to Ross for helping spread the word. I want to welcome the Intro to New Media class at UIC. Thank you for joining us. I want to welcome the game design students at the University of Wisconsin. Thanks to Peter for spreading the word. I want to thank the media art students and the School of Visual Art and Design students at the University of South Carolina. Thanks to Bailey and others for helping spread the word. Thanks to Caleb for spreading the word to the students of the game design program at DePaul University and students from the Media Art and Game Design module in the Radio, TV, Film department at Northwestern University. Welcome, and thanks to Derek for helping spread the word. We have to thank the Electric Mirrors for providing the intro music that's very groovy that you were just enjoying, and of course, the Oldham Music Center Youth Brass Band for the fanfare that you're about to hear. Before we start, please, if you know of any organization or group that would be interested in this kind of thing where we talk to people who make video games, or have any feedback at all, please, why not drop us a line at info@vgagallery.org. We would love to hear from you. So I think those are all the credits and thank you. So please, super producer Bryce, could you hit us with the VGA Fireside fanfare? Hooray! It's been played. The trumpets have sounded, which means this particular session of VGA Fireside is officially in session. Please let me introduce today's esteemed video game guest. I need to resize my notes doc so I can properly, properly credit our guest. Please forgive the pause. Okay, today, VGA Gallery invites Greg Kythreotis to speak at the first VGA Fireside of 2022. Greg is half of the two-person game development studio Shedworks, where he's a creative director and has worked as creative director on many cross-disciplinary projects, from websites to apps to exhibitions and music videos. And their most recent endeavor is the desert exploration game Sable, which is available now on Steam. Everyone at home, please help me welcome Greg Kythreotis.
Thank you. Hello.
Please, can you hear the applause from all around the mountain ridges of the internet?
Oh yeah, it's rapturous. It's rapturous.
Greg, thanks so much for joining us. Very glad to have you, especially because you're staying up late in order to join us in a time zone of the future. Because it's in front of. I just assume you're speaking to us from the future. That's an exciting feature of today's episode. How is the future, by the way?
Grey and miserable, as it always is in London. So I think we'll carry that on into the future with us. Maybe save you from it wherever you happen to be. But
if it turns around, please give us notice. Then we'll know 6 hours ahead that it's going to, perk up.
Okay.
Okay. So we have plenty of different people tuning in today that are interested in working in the field of video games. Perhaps they're just starting out or haven't even started out and they want to start out. So the way we like to start discussing the work of our guests is just to find out how it is that you got into the field and what it is that drew you into video game making in the first place. So simply, Greg, how did you get involved in video game making?
So yeah, I actually started I studied architecture at university, and when I was studying, a family friend of ours was visiting, and he was an architect, Mark, and I was showing him my work, and he said to me, oh, this is really interesting, but it's not super architectural. What do you want to do after you graduate? And I was like, well, I actually would love to make video games, but I didn't really have a clear path as to how that would happen. And he said, well, Daniel, family friend of mine, like he's really interested in making games too. You guys should meet up and have a chat. And Daniel and I, we hadn't spoken for about 10 years at that point. So we went to the pub. This was maybe 6 months before graduation, and we were chatting, and we knew, well, he was learning to teaching himself how to program. He was studying comparative literature, and we knew we weren't going to get internships even or jobs or anything in the industry. So we said, why don't we just start our own internship, start our own company? We watched Indie Game the movie. It's easy, yeah. And no, but we thought it'll be a good chance to just try some stuff out and see what we can learn and see if we can release something, then great. And at the time I was working out of my parents' shed, and so we kind of converted it into more of a studio, and that's how we started really. And we kind of continued from there. And for the first 3 years we did a couple of games, but we also did some web design, web app stuff. We did contract projects for apps and stuff. So a lot of the time that might be one of us, mostly Daniel actually doing programming, but occasionally I would come in, and so I do the UI design or whatever, or artworking. And then we had our own games that we were kind of working on in tandem, and those tended to be smaller mobile projects. And we were just kind of learning the trade, I guess. Trying to release games and releasing them and then screaming into the void where nobody was listening for a while. And after 3 or 4 years, we built up a little bit, and we were getting semi-regular contract work. And we decided to do a game that played to our strengths, which we hadn't done up to this point. And we decided to do a game with a building in it. We had someone who studied architecture, and we decided to do a game with a building in it. And we kind of, that's where we started to think about Sable and work on Sable from there, really. And that's been it since, really. Sable.
Terrific. That is the origin story of both Shedworks and Sable, which is now, I assume, dominating your attention on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. Well, we want to make sure that everyone tuning in can see Sable running live, but we'll save that for a little bit later. When you mentioned your sort of pre-Shedworks backgrounds, you mentioned architecture and your clever tales doing comparative literature. That sort of supports my next question, which is what kinds of non-game kinds of media do you most directly take inspiration from, or do you feel like that it all just kind of overlaps with games? And do you think that the background in those other disciplines informed the way you did the non like explicitly game projects like apps and websites?
Yeah, I mean, so architecture for me personally is what I look at a lot. Daniel, I know he obviously looks a lot at literature as well and thinks a lot about that stuff. And we constantly talking back and forth, and actually how we know each other. His dad's an architect, my dad's an architect, so there's still that connection, and he has that in his family as well. But yeah, and then I think we look visually at like graphic novels and illustrative things and heavily stylized things a lot, I guess, just because, well, I just think it's really cool. I like it. I find it inspiring. But yeah, that's a lot of what kind of influences us. And I'd say in terms of my process personally, architecture is totally like built into, or like architectural design process is totally built into a lot of what I do. And I don't know how different that is to what other like level designers or world builders will do, but it's just what I learned at architecture school. And yeah, in terms of working on other projects, well, look, it gave me a technical foundation in design. Generally, obviously on a software basis, Photoshop, AutoCAD, 3D software, what have you. But also I think so I actually studied art at what you call a foundation level in the UK. So it's just 1 year of art. And then I switched over to architecture because I'd finished that. And the approach was such a big kind of mentality shift from this like art approach to architecture, where in the beginning I was trying to treat architecture like art, and it wasn't working at all, because it's so much more about like functional problem solving, I guess, and client-based, client-oriented, site-oriented sort of things. And I think that's probably more how fine art becomes, maybe, if you go out and practice it. You tend to have to work within those limitations. But as a student, I think that mentality shift was big, and that's definitely influenced my personal approach in games. And I think it's it's influenced how I think about design problems and how we're going to approach them, for sure. Yeah.
Is there a particular school of architecture that you feel you draw on the most, or even like a particular building or set of buildings that inform the way you go about creating environments for games? Or is it just like an architectural perspective that you feel like you've gained?
Yeah, it's more like, it's just like a wealth of references and stuff to pull from, and knowledge. But also, so I studied at Bartlett School of Architecture, and there's quite like strong studio-oriented atmosphere there, and they push a lot of the visual design and the visual development, and you play with materials and stuff like that. And it's more that process, that studio-oriented process. So, like, for example, I had a friend who went to Cambridge, and their approach seems to be much more based on like academic history, kind of looking at more historical architectural styles, and maybe a bit more sensitivity to like site and like testing around that. And then other friends went to like Bath, which was shared. The first year is like shared with engineering or something, and it's like hyper engineering based compared. They each have their strengths, but I was in the more studio based one, and that meant I spent a lot of time in like workshops, like making stuff by hand, models, hand drawing. So the first year when I was at architecture school, they wouldn't let us use computers in our portfolio production. So we had to do all our drawings, by hand on big A1 sheets, and and with like rote strings, and like getting like line thicknesses right and stuff like that. And obviously when you transition to CAD, you then have the kind of like, oh, this is where that comes from, like grounding. But also really pushes you. You have to, I had to have physiotherapy on my hand because I spent so long drawing in that first year in
Speaking of that, just triggered this memory. When I did my new media art MFA at University of Illinois at Chicago, we were down the hallway from this very large group architecture studio. And sometimes I'd get the chance to talk to some of them. For the most part, they were just working really, really hard. Just like, heads down. And I remember this distinct memory of, speaking of like not using computers, just all of them in this giant room on their like tall desks, making just hundreds and hundreds of tiny bricks. Right.
Yeah.
Is that the sort of thing you ever had to do that perhaps didn't exactly help your and longevity?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, you would sometimes
brick
just
after
suffer.
brick.
Yeah, you would kind of suffer. There were definitely times where I drew hundreds of individual bricks painstakingly with it, and actually it kind of didn't turn out that well. But you just kind of like have committed at that point. I remember going to Istanbul and spending 8 hours in the Han, which is like kind of in the back of the bazaar area where they make a lot of the products, which some get sold in the bazaar and a lot of it actually just gets shipped abroad. And I was in a gold chain making factory and I just was drawing the section there for 8 hours straight. I was just sketching and taking measurements, and I had just this like incredibly detailed drawing. And it's the sort of thing that it's just like, if I had like a laser pointer and some, I don't know, you can just kind of fluff it, but you're told like, no, you have to take centimeter. Yeah. It's the sort of thing as a student as well, you get really caught up on. And I remember as well as a presentation thing. So one year I decided I was designing I was in Chicago and we did a site trip to Chicago, and I went and explored these old, these kind of steel manufacturing factories, I think in the Northwest. Mm-hmm. And one of the ones I was just kind of wandering around, and one of the ones I just walked into was Finkel, and they were moving site, and I was kind of on the old site, and it had all been abandoned. So I was just walking through this old, and so I based my project on that, and I created like a pseudo religion based on this, and I was looking at like profane and profound stuff in other religions, and so I decided, okay, I'm going to do 2 prints, 2 books, one for the profane and one for the profound, things that you tuck, whatever. And I decided, I'm going to hand bind these myself. And so I was sewing together, and it's just unnecessary things that you learn that is I mean, you were competing with it.
But then it makes a difference in the end, right? Certain intentionality.
You learn what's a waste of time and what's useful, but sometimes you do have to waste your time to discover that.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but it's this concept of the new religion that was based off of an abandoned Chicago factory. Is this perhaps like could be used as fodder for a future project the public could see, or is this buried forever?
No, I think. Well, I was definitely at that time thinking about video games a lot, and I did a project based. Prior to, so we used to have 2 projects, one in the beginning and one towards the end. And the first one was less connected to literal architecture, and I did that based on, but I was always connecting my projects to video games. So that one was connected to Fez really heavily, and I was using the Chicago pedway, like this I don't know how.
I know it. Some of our viewers definitely do as well.
Yeah. So I was looking at the pedway, and I created a virtual pedway that you could only navigate through orthogonal camera movement. And so you would have to teleport across. And it was like this virtual, you can find it online, actually, if you Google it, it's somewhere. My tutor uploaded it.
It's happy to share.
Yeah, it's kind of a boring video, but it was like, but it's kind of got some fun moments architecturally. And then the second project, the pseudo, that was kind of like, I was thinking a lot about BioShock at the time, and I was thinking about America and cult personality, and it was my first trip to America, and how like we ended up going to like I think is it SC Johnson. We ended up driving out to we're looking at like Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture, and there was like the Johnson buildings out there, and it was like, I remember just thinking, wow, this is really strange. Like and it was almost like the staff there were really reverent of the like, maybe I think they must be dead. Like these, these men.
Right, I think so.
Yeah, like in the 40s or whatever, and they're like, and you're kind of like, you're just thinking he sounds like an asshole, but they're talking about him like in a really reverent way, and I found that really interesting, and I felt like that was something that you do get in Europe, but it felt like it had a slightly different like corporate flavor in America, whereas in Europe, when you hear those things, it tends to be connected to some sort of like historical atrocity or like whatever leadership. So it's a different atmosphere, I feel like.
Like you have a longer duration of time to build those kind of myths, and so maybe is it kind of seems funny or different because that myth is being built on such a shorter time frame.
The mythology is built on like S.C. Johnson products, and it's like connected to like the modern, like things that I buy in my supermarket here, and whereas maybe the European ones, you're right, like are more disconnected and they feel more abstract in a way because of that. Like they feel less relevant, and there aren't people maybe who would have seen these people alive or whatever. And
well, maybe
sorry, I've gone on a total tangent. Totally,
I appreciate that, but I'm hoping perhaps that some of that insight will actually illuminate perhaps a live demo of Sable. If I don't know if there is any connection there to what you learned in your travels to the United States, but maybe even the early scenes, perhaps some of that sort of like building a space of reverence might be shown, or we'll see.
I did a lot of research on ritual architecture, so that maybe informed some of the design language and learning about particularly like Catholic church structure and stuff like that. So those things.
Terrific. Bryce, if you don't mind, would you fire up Sable and play a bit of this game as we continue to look and discuss? So we're looking at some ornate symbols that introduce us in the entry, the sort of intro menus. Greg, tell us, set the scene. How did you envision Sable to start off? This is the first moments of the game.
So I mean, with this opening, really trying to just set up like atmosphere and just a feeling of like what the world is as a mystery, but also establish kind of Sable as a character in a way. Like she's a kind of, these are old ruins that are static and here, and she's kind of like bursting in and disrupting them and exploring them and contemplating them on her own. So like it starts off with her sitting and staring at this kind of face door. And part of what we wanted to do was set up this sequence where you start in front of this door, you leave, you do a bunch of stuff, and then you come back, and then the door opens. And we wanted to kind of set that up for the player, that they might see things and not open them or not do them yet, and then come back later or walk away from it and come back.
Yeah.
But also, we kind of started off in this small inner space because we wanted to teach the player how to control the character, and also provide a kind of compression before a moment of like expansion, which is when you get out into the canyon space. And
you don't want to start in the big arena. You want to make sure that it sort of feels like growth from the first moment. So at this point, I just want to mention to anyone tuning in right now, please feel free to ask any questions you have for Greg about Sable or any of the stuff we're talking about, and producer Bryce will alley-oop those to us, and we'd love to take your questions and try to get them answered right here, right now. I guess it was the very impressive moment where you're in front of the large ornamental face on the wall. That I do know if that tied into your experience looking at these different sites in the United States. But you're saying that was more influenced by other sort of historical ritual architecture?
I mean, I mentioned Catholic architecture, but that was related to my project as a student, like 2012 or 2013. But this the architecture here, I looked a lot at just like ritual architecture in general, and there's a really fantastic book called Ritual Architecture, and I forget the author, but it has some really amazing diagrammatic like sequencing and thinking a lot about ritual in video games in general, just because video games are such a kind of like ritualistic process, like playing video games in general.
Yeah.
But also just trying to like express the kind of like historical culture of the people here and imply like different moments in time. So like this temple, for example, has inside it has like these kind of these inlets.
Mhm.
And the idea with this canyon is that it was once filled with water, and there's like an old dam in the corner, and that actually boats would come out and go into the temple itself. But now, because it's drained, it's all, you're unable to kind of access it in the same way, and so it changes the context of what the temple itself is and how people use it. And so those were the kinds of layers of history that we never tell that story in the game explicitly, but we imply it. Like there's a dam, there's some old wooden boats going around, and all of the like architecture. So like this structure here, this camp with the kind of like tower structure, you know, it's slightly higher up, and that's because it would have been like an island where boats might have docked before. But now it's just a kind of rock with a little cave underneath it, and yeah, it's used slightly differently. So it's kind
That's
of
all.
ways we
It's
try to
information that comes out of just the logic of the environment, and it's still experienceable and sort of knowable, even if you don't have to spell it out textually in the dialogue. I just realized I've got this crazy dappled sunlight effect on me. I don't know if that's very distracting. Please hold on just a moment. I was feeling very shimmery there for a second with the Venetian blind. Anyway, back to the game. Oh, actually, we have an audience question that I would like to put to you here. Someone tuning in just asked, Sable looks like it has non-traditional architecture, desertscapes, and futuristic buildings. How did your architecture background inform the design of Sable, and what was your niche within your architecture study with a specific on, is there more futuristic design? Like, so it's a continuation of what we've been talking about.
Yeah. So my background just informed a lot of the research basis as well. So I did a lot of research on vernacular architecture, as particularly in desert environments. I actually, so when I was I went to GEC 2019, and myself and the sound designer, we went on a kind of road trip through like the desert out to Vegas and then south down to, not quite to Phoenix. We went to this place called Arcosanti, which is a kind of like experimental desert living arcology. And so we did research on how you might live in the desert architecturally, but also I went to Marrakesh in Morocco and looked at architecture there, and even growing up, so I'm half Cypriot, and it's a very hot country. It's not quite desert, but it's, you know, it's in the Middle East, the island, or it's just off the coast of the Middle East Mediterranean, in the Levant. So like some of the villages and stuff, like the refugee villages where I'd go see my great grandma and stuff, like it was just indelibly in the back of my head, having grown up, like been to visit those places. So yeah, those things all tied in, and I tried to research vernacular architecture, and the other thing was we tried to think of it in 3 layers. So we have like the ships, which were kind of like the progenitor architecture, the sci-fi kind of future ships, but now that's inverted and they're the past. The kind of middle term, which is this more stone-based local material architecture that looks more like traditional ruins that you might get, and that's stuff that was built after the ships had arrived. And then you have the more modern nomadic style architecture, like the tents and stuff, and try to think of them in these 3 distinct periods, but also work out how they like overlap and overlay, and and interact with one another. That was really important. But in terms of my own niche within architecture study, I was thinking a lot about video games and stuff, and I guess a lot of what they let us do was just explore what we wanted. So the Finkel, that project, I was looking, it was a steel manufacturing thing. So I created a pseudo religion around the manufacturing of steel, and my building had like lava that would flow down through it when they were manufacturing something or something. And it was a bit ridiculous and over the top. I wouldn't say I had a really particular specialism, but I guess in that sense it's quite a like sci-fi world building project. And I feel like world building was felt like my specialism, and telling stories through architecture felt like something that I always wanted to do. And
from the get-go, you were trying to find ways to overlay narrative and sort of cultural ideas, or embed them directly into the spatial environment.
Yeah. And even through really subtle things like sequencing of spacing, and because that stuff comes from somewhere, right? Like if you put a like Roman or Grecian column in your game, like I was playing Pokemon Arceus recently, and it has like classical Roman columns in it somewhere, and you're kind of like, this is really funny because this is meant to be in like feudal. It's kind of like set in a like feudal Japanese setting, but it has these like ancient Roman, and it's so weird. And it's just like, okay, what's the world building in this where this has happened? And it's quite funny. I mean, I think they kind of could justify it if they wanted to, but they didn't. They never really do. But yeah.
We have another audience question. I think pertains to the story of the game itself, which is how do you empathize with the Worm Journal writer as a developer?
Yeah, I mean, that was a fun one to play with and write. Yeah, I guess the madness that develops as you're like kind of developing this project, and it consumes every part of your life, and you're kind of, I empathize quite a lot. I never thought about it like that, but maybe that was a kind of like subliminal, subconscious expression of the process of game development. But actually the idea of the worm was something that was really early on, and it's actually one of the things that it's one of the few things that we have no quest. We don't really lead the player to it at all, but it's actually quite a big chunk of content, which is quite a fun thing to always play with, like those secrets, I guess. But, yeah.
Just for a moment of description, Bryce playing the game, underneath our conversation here, Sable has been riding around a vast and open desert on a speeder bike that is as old and cantankerous as it is beautiful. And and we just made it back to a village where some more dialogue is happening with other characters. So I'm very glad we explored this variety of architectural references that you've drawn on, or just experience, and therefore is in your head when you're making the world of this game that we're looking at. I would like to pivot and also talk about illustration and animation, and how it informs a game, especially the visual style of a game like Sable. So a lot of the games that I find I'm very interested in studying or exhibiting do have this kind of transhistorical conversation going on, where there's some historical figure that is subtly being transposed to video games, maybe in a way that we've not seen in games before. And so the way the environment and the figures look drawn, to me and others I think who've looked at the game bear striking resemblance to the legendary comic and concept artist Mobius, but also as far as tone and environment, there's a lot of connection to the films of Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli. So I guess, I want to give you the opportunity to talk about your relationship with those sort of non-video game figures, some figures that are further back in history, and how you arrived at the idea to incorporate them into a video game.
Yeah, I mean, So I guess, yeah, the work of Mobius is definitely a big inspiration of ours. And yeah, like you mentioned Ghibli as well. I think Mobius's stuff, in a way, it's I mean, his work's just super inspirational. Like when you look at it, just I think the thing that I really admire most, more than as much as the technical, the like actual the drawing, the
Mm-hmm.
unbelievable drawings, is the kind of like world building, the like sense that there's more than what's on the page to the image.
Yeah.
I think that that sort of stuff is just so strong in his work. But and then I think tonally, in terms of the warmth, the animation, the storytelling, like Ghibli really was something that informed where we wanted to go. Um, but yeah, I think a lot of the approach is stuff that we just like. We look a lot at graphic novels and yeah, grew up with animation, anime, cartoons, stuff like that. But also on a purely technical level, it made more sense to go for a style that was a bit cleaner, lower poly, lower detail, because we were such a small team. Doing something hyper realistic, especially with characters and stuff, we can't compete on that level with what's going on elsewhere. So the easiest solution to that is don't compete. But I mean, that's a slightly convenient way to look at it. I would just say I really enjoy working on this sort of style, and I find it. And the other fun thing about it, again, from a other standpoint, it helps us stand out a lot. But I think that's a lot down to the execution, particularly of the shader work and the like line work and stuff. And Daniel did a lot of that work in terms of the actual technical side. I think our lines are very stable in a way that I think is hard to achieve. And we were really committed to this style to the extent where we do things like we limit the frame animation on the character's run cycle in order to make it look two-dimensional, kept all the lighting really flat. These are things that cause a lot of problems when you're making open world 3D game. But we chose to try and solve the problems rather than just shy away from it. Things like reading depth, judging platforming, and so we had to do a lot to try and solve for it. And actually, this is an example of a scene where we really don't have a lot of depth going on. Partly is because here we're not asking the player to do a lot, but in other places we have to bring in more layering and more readability, so that players can actually play the game, because that is the number one priority ultimately. But
Right.
yeah, in terms of, I think it's just also the tone of those works, and I guess it's also kind of a shorthand for people who might like these sorts of games. I feel like when they see the art,
Right.
the people who would be interested in the sort of game we're making will be more likely to pick it up. Again, yeah, like
I think I know what you mean. There's a
yeah,
self-selecting group is like, I don't know what's in here yet, but I do feel like I'm getting a very quick message for me. Bryce, would you
yeah.
mind? I don't know if you can turn the game volume down. Of course, we want to listen to the game volume, but I don't know. There's just too many sounds going on at the same time.
The other thing I'd say about the art is the color and the tone was so important to get right, and I think a lot of that convey. I think we tried to keep it quite optimistic and bright, and I think the game tries to be quite optimistic, and it feeds into the tone of what we're trying to do, and maybe there's a bit of like naivety to it, and we tried to introduce a lot of imperfection. So, for example, all of the texture work, for example, is
keep talking.
yeah, a lot of the texture work, for example, is hand drawn by like on an iPad Pro or whatever, and then taken into the game. And we try to not overwork those and not make things too perfect, and even try to like ruffle up the geometry where things were just, unless we needed it to look really like perfect and straight, if it was like a industrialized thing, try to make it look like it was made by hand, and we really wanted to give the impression of like there being a creative kind of thumbprint on all of this.
Where you see sort of the artist's mark, right? Like where you see in other media. I appreciate how you describe that sort of the rationale about like why to work in style and why to draw on specific references in order to conceptualize that style. Yes, it is a good idea to not try to have a hyper photorealistic aesthetic, especially if you're not in your means. But as you just mentioned, it's not just about that either, right? Like that. Saying that on its own would assume that like if everyone had unlimited time, resources, and staff, that all anyone would ever do is photorealistic style, right? Which is of course not the case, right? And there's so many other reasons to be working in your own lane, right? Which a lot of other freedoms.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thinking about other games as well and growing up and what was influential, like things like Wind Waker or like even like Journey and those sorts of games really, they hold up as well. The art direction is arguably like what keeps them going. And you look at the more realistic stuff that was ahead technologically at the time. Maybe it doesn't even hold up as well now.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a different potential for longevity when you make your own mark in such a way. So Bryce has been playing the game and demonstrating the sort of main actions that you get to act, to engage with the world of Sable with. So it's a game that emphasizes gliding and climbing and riding, and these are familiar and very. They offer a lot of pleasure of exploration, and I guess I want to just talk about these mechanics for a second. How did you arrive at the idea that these would be the sort of core set of actions that the player of Sable would take in order to engage with all of these architectural references and illustration references and the story of the world that we just talked about?
Yeah, so I mean, our core design kind of the thing that we wanted to achieve mostly with the design was to make a game about exploration. That was our number one goal, more than any other objective, was to make a game where players felt like they had freedom to explore a world and discover what was in it. And we knew it would be this kind of desert setting, so having the bike was really important to traverse such long distances. But we also knew that like when you arrived at the thing that you saw in the distance, we would want the player to be able to fully explore it. So, that's where the on-foot actions come in. And, the other things are kind of design, the climbing is a puzzle in itself, like climbing and having the stamina and stuff like that. And, Breath of the Wild obviously did that as well. We learned a lot from that game. But the other thing that we learned from it, the other thing that it maximized what we were doing with the architecture. It maximized what we were designing, because I was making these fully realized 3D environments, and it meant that players could then explore every nook and cranny, which in retrospect maybe caused a lot more work than we appreciated, because it is probably a lot less work just to make something that you can't explore in a full 3D sense. But we just wanted players to have that possibility space and to feel like they had that freedom. And I think that this idea of freedom is such an important part of the game. And the gliding ability is something that we tied in narratively, but also it's something that we really basically it can be this simple, is that it's a 3D platforming game, right? Like you can move in 3D space, but when a game is 3D, it's always being flattened to a 2D plane, i.e. your computer screen. So reading depth is always difficult, and reading depth when everything is flat shaded is even more difficult. So we knew we had to give the player a solution for resolving that reading depth and also if they make a mistake to solve it. So we give player control after they jumped, basically. So if they make a jump, they can always go back on themselves or adjust their positioning. And a lot of video games, they might have a double jump, or like Mario, for example, always has a shadow cast directly downwards, right? And we wanted to have our game feel a little bit more grounded than that in terms of the player character, in terms of her feeling like a real person. So giving her a double jump didn't feel like the right solution, but and the glide also means that you can it complements the climbing, because it means that you climb up to a tall thing and then you can glide off the tall thing, and that's a very satisfying thing to do. So yeah, it was all these different things that it solved really nicely for us, and we led into that.
It is very satisfying, and I'm glad you mentioned it. It would feel very vernacular for those familiar with Breath of the Wild. I was curious if that was a part of your thought process, where it's like, if you're playing that title and you're a big fan of the gliding, the verticality of that map, which is kind of what I think is one of the sort of main innovations of Breath of the Wild, is that freedom in the sort of the y-axis. Like if you thought, the player of Sable, if you liked gliding and climbing in other contexts like Breath of the Wild, you're going to feel right at home here.
Yeah, that shorthand was really useful for just conveying what the game was. Like when it first came out, when it was first coming out, because we'd actually been thinking about Sable for about a year before that. We were like, shit, like would Nintendo have done it? Like, but what's the point? But then I think we realized, no, this is actually really useful for us. We'll learn a lot from it. We'll be able to study it, and also it will help us communicate to people what the game is without having to like finish the game. So yeah, it was really helpful in that regard. And yeah, you just learn a lot from having games like that, I guess. Yeah.
Sure. I have one question I wanted to touch on, sort of behind the scenes process and how roles get distributed, especially again for people starting out. Who does what, and what kind of like overlap happens can be pretty opaque for someone just sort of learning the tools the first time. So can you talk about what specific roles and tasks you take on as creative director for a project like this, and what a collaborator like Daniel would be doing, and whether or not those are very specific roles, or if there's a lot of crisscross and overlap?
Yeah, I think with this project that there was a lot of overlap, especially with me and Daniel. We worked together for so long now that it's almost like we almost don't need to like talk too much about an idea. We're just like, we get it. Like, you mean this and this? Okay, yeah, I get it. So, but we always had quite specific roles in that we did what we could, and then there's a kind of like overlap point where the implementation happens. But with this project, we had to get a bit more specific as to because we started to bring on team members, and then you have to bring in a bit more structure, because when you're working with other people, especially when you're not so familiar, you can't expect them to just understand your like telepathic understanding between you two. So yeah, I guess as a creative director, so the thing is, we say creative director, but and he says we have technical director for him, but we probably did, I don't know, 7 or 8 jobs throughout development in different capacities each, and the role changed throughout the project based on who else was on the project. But I'd say generally it's about being a vision holder on the project. But but in more specific terms, I mean, I did all of the like world planning and setup and layouts and level design. I did all the concept art except for some of the clothing. Shanaz did some of those, and then and then a lot of the world building as well. But with the world building, that was always like a collaborative thing with Daniel, with Meg, with the sound designers, even like with the writers, Kim and David. Like everyone was kind of like able to contribute to that as well. But yeah, I think generally as well, it's about setting, as a creative director, it's about providing guidance and consistency to the project. So, when we're working with, say, Michelle, Japanese Breakfast, and talking about like what the track for an area should be. The area doesn't exist yet. Maybe we have a sketch for it. Maybe we don't. Maybe we haven't even locked it down. But you have to get the ball rolling. And sometimes it's good for her to produce some music because it will inspire your process too. But you also have to make the call where it's like, this isn't quite right, like, or whatever. And you have to be able to say that to your collaborators and say like what's working and what isn't, and then find a way to nudge it into something that is coherent and cohesive. But sorry, it's hard to be specific because you just do so much as an indie developer.
Yes.
I did a lot of 3D modeling. I did concept art. I did writing. I did I was paying the invoices for contractors. I was billing people for business, and doing meetings and marketing and PR and drawing magazine covers and doing interviews, and like it's so many things, and planning, like quest planning, narrative planning, a lot of that stuff, world building. It's different things at different stages.
It's a lot, and it all flows together, especially in the lived experience of a day, to the point where it's sort of like, how did we even come up with these different categories? Doesn't everyone have to work in all these different capacities?
I'd say as well, we were learning on this project, so we probably weren't the best at being super organized in that sense. And, there was a lot of lessons to learn about, take from that, about organization and structure. And I think the biggest thing that I had to do was make sure everyone else knew what they were doing and had work. Like a lot of my time was spent producing work for other people, like setting up, okay, we need like 3 Beatles or 6 Beatles or whatever. So I'm gonna have to do 6 concepts and then explain what the concepts are, get the concepts to Shanaz, make sure she can model it, and then get those models to Micah, who will then, and then that's a kind of, producers might do that role, but in our thing, like with the art team, I was doing a lot of that back and forth, because also there's a level of like guidance to that where it's like, okay, as this goes from Shanaz to Micah, I now have to explain to Micah how the legs should animate or whatever, and then that goes, implementation and beyond. But sorry.
It's no apologies necessary. It's commendable that you have been able to keep all of those what it seems like sort of head-spinningly numerous moving parts together enough. So because when the game that Bryce was just playing for us feels so complete and of one thing.
I don't want to do it again. Not how we did it. I'll put it that way. I'll put it that way. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Greg, could you believe our time is running short already? It's already 5:55 at my time, and we don't want to keep you all night. I'll mention to the audience if there's anything else you'd like to ask. We're probably still squeezed in. Would you be up for what we debuted on the last episode, which is a sort of lightning round of a general game?
Yeah. Okay. I see there's an audience question as well about the universe of Sable.
Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah. Let's ask that question right now. So, question for the audience. Does the universe of Sable imagine other parts of the world that aren't in the game? I love the harder sci-fi shades of the Watch backstory.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially in regards to, I think, the stuff that, is in the Watch and in the whale and the ships and stuff. But and a lot of that stuff is kind of off planet in my mind as well. But stuff that's kind of inaccessible. I would have loved to have played with that a bit more, and we had the ideas to explore that. But at some point, you have to release the game and get it over the line. And
indeed,
I also don't want to spend personally. I think a lot of it comes down to selfish reasons as well. Like, do I want to spend 6 years on this project rather than 4? Like, not really. I kind of am ready to move on and do something else. But But yeah, there is some stuff related to that we really wanted to explore. But we're a
For
team.
your future desires, would you want to fill out sort of like what's going on the neighboring planet in this game, or do you want to move into a totally new space?
It's more. Yeah, I don't really know what we would do with it exactly. I know what I would have liked to have done with it in this world, in this game, in this area that the game is set in, but yeah, I'm not. I think at this point, it's nice to kind of over plan and then cut back, because then it feels like, because then it creates layers to your world building as well. So
Yeah.
like, if I think about like Shadow of the Colossus, when you're just exploring that, like the empty parts of that world, there are locations that were clearly meant for like Colossus battles that they've left in as ruins, and it gives the world a sense of depth, even though there's nothing there. And I think we kind of built the world knowing that things would just not make it. There was so the stuff in the Aries, for example, I planned a whole other town for that, and it never made it in because the first town took so long, and it was such an undertaking itself. But that's the sort of thing that would have been really fun, and there's going to be a lot of interconnected elements, but it would have really added a whole year and a half probably to development. So
yeah,
got it.
And it makes sense. I mean, life itself presents us with many details that do not come with an explanation, right?
Yeah,
relatability there.
We knew that would be a big part. Like, I think that was the core of the game in a lot of ways, was that like, we won't explain everything really explicitly. We want you to work in your head, like think about what it might be. And I think the ambiguity, because the people, even in the contemporary nomadic people that live there, they don't have all the information. So like, part of that process is that misinterpretation and misunderstanding of history. And we played a little bit with giving hints to the player about the world. So like, a lot of our world building, if you know London, some of it ties to like London based things, like the names of the ships are like brutalist architectural references, or like the names of the stations are actually named after like London tube stations in like local to us. So like, Burnt Oak Station is like, not far from me, or Seven Sisters is down in Tottenham. And those are names that we gave to locations in the game. And that actually is tied into the world building. It's not just a like fun little thing, but we wanted to develop it. But that's the kind of thing where we're playing with player knowledge versus Sable knowledge, like what she knows versus what you know as a player.
Right.
And that's always fun as well.
That comment about sort of embedding locations to your own, real world region does segue me up to I'll give you 2 lightning round questions, and then we can wrap up. How does that sound?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So one thing I'm very interested in when I talk to different people from very different parts of the globe is to talk about even though we're making virtual worlds with imaginary worlds of video games, we're all coming from a particular perspective in real corporeal space. And so, I always want to ask everyone, how much do you think one's region or physical location and sort of culture there informs the video game work that you do?
Yeah, I think it informs everything. Like, you can't know what it informs. It's it's everything in a way. It permeates everything. It's, even if you're not doing it based on a real place or whatever, you're trying to disconnect from what is local to you. It's still that
it comes up anyway.
Disconnecting from what is local to you, and so it's always relative to what is local. And it's, you also get inspired by things that are around you, like some of the architectural detailing, like in the opening temple, are just things that I saw on like a walk right by our like new office or whatever. Like, and it's like, oh, there are these old arches and they have a particular shape or geometry, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna take that and like play with that and bring it into the game. Or like I was mentioning, like going to the refugee villages in Cyprus when I was growing up, and how the feeling, the kind of like higgledy-piggledy kind of elements and overlapping, and the treatment of architecture. Like my great grandma, her house, like where she lived, like the courtyard would open up and it had like this vine structure over it, so it's like kind of grapes just like hanging down from the ceiling basically, and that was like just this feeling of inside and outside blending together. And that's the sort of thing you don't get that in London. I'm sorry, you just don't. And that's the sort of thing that I feel like for me, I will always think about and bring to these things. So yeah, but again, you're talking about a country that's like 40 degrees centigrade. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but versus miserable grey London. So
Right. So I have one final question, and then we'll wrap up, which is another one I've asked of others. But considering all the kinds of spaces, online or in person, where audiences meet different kinds of media or different kinds of cultural artifacts, whatever it is, what's one kind of space that is not normally associated with video games that you would like to see your work be in?
It depends what you mean by my work, because now I see myself as like a very much video game designer, but we are doing some, like I did some work with Shinichiro Watanabe on Flying Lotus's music video for More, and I like 3D modeled the robot or something, and doing that sort of stuff is really cool. Like that was definitely led by him. I can't claim much credit for it, but it's the sort of thing that is like a fun project to be involved with, and we're kind of like, we're always having these discussions and suggestions, and we get emails. So yeah, I've really enjoyed working with Michelle, actually, Japanese Breakfast. So like doing any music stuff, like when we did the stage production for the Summer Games Festival, and we had this like massive stage behind her, and I wasn't involved in the visuals for that so much, other than like having produced the game, but we had video tech guys and the trailer guys working on that. But it was still such a cool thing to like, I was getting to talk to like her like outfit, the person who picks out her outfits and stuff like that, and be like, yeah, this will fit the vibe of this is what I think. And I can't claim credit for any of that work, but it's just cool to see people working on those things and touch it and be involved in it in some way. It's just a real shame with COVID that we never had many opportunities to like actually go and be there, and like, I think that's the thing that the other side. I really like physical media. I love books. I love design books, art books, process, and I also quite like model making. Like I have friends that do like architectural model making. I'd love to see like stuff from Sable translated into like physical models. I love that stuff. It's so cool. And I'd actually really love to produce that stuff myself if I had time or skill to do it. But I don't have that time or skill anymore, unfortunately. So yeah.
All great answers. And we've kept you with the audience a little bit late. So I guess I want to wrap up first of all by just saying thank you so much for lending your answers. We're getting invaded by a toddler again. That's probably another good reason to wrap up. It's the internet, so we always close. There's rules to the internet, which means we close with plugging things. Is there anything you would like to plug? I guess Sable is something we could,
go check out Sable. And
anything else?
Check out Michelle's album. I think.
Yes.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Japanese Breakfast, obviously, and actually the vinyls should be coming out soon. I drew the cover for that, so you can check that out too. And the music's really good.
You heard it here. Check out Japanese Breakfast. I would like to mention that if you enjoy this program and want to see more like it, consider checking out the VGA website and purchasing a fine art print. We support artists and our organization with fine art prints that they're all browsable on our website. And check out our other online deliverables like the VGA zine. and maybe even in-person events could be coming your way later this year if everything goes according to plan. I think that that's all the stuff I want to promote. But let me just recap my thank yous I did at the beginning, because truly it's a team effort. And I want to thank the producer and director of operations, Bryce Pauls, for all the hard work on this show, designer and director of communications, Eleanor Schichtel, the VGA staff and the VGA board, the IGDA Association, IGDA Chicago chapter. Thank you to Ross for spreading the word. The intro to new media class at UIZ. Great to have you. Game design students from University of Wisconsin. Thanks for hanging out. Media art students and School of Visual Art and Design students at the University of South Carolina. Great to have you. Game design students from DePaul University. Thanks to Caleb. And students from the Media Art and Game Design module, Radio, TV, Film at Northwestern. Awesome to have you too. Thanks to Electric Mirrors for the intro music and the Oldham Music Center Youth Brass Band for the wonderful fanfare. And as I mentioned earlier, if you know of an organization or group that would be interested in this or have any feedback whatsoever, why not go ahead and drop us a line at info@vgagallery.org. We would love to hear from you. Any parting words for us, Greg?
No, play Elden Ring. Have a good yeah. That's what I'm going to do now till 2 a.m. and then regret it in the morning. So
right. It's always a great moment in the episode to try out new catchphrases, and that's a great new catchphrase from Greg. Try out Elden Ring and play it until 2 a.m. Thank you so much for fielding these questions, letting us share Sable with everyone watching today, and from all of us at VGA Fireside, please stay warm.